Hello and welcome to this session of Learn IT Courses Online. We're glad that you're joining us again in the Introduction to Database Administration courses. As I mentioned before, that the core of it is the table, and that's the source of the tables, and that's where our data is stored. And then the database administrator interacts through SQL, make sure that they have a proper database design, security, that the right people have access, performance, to make sure that's running on the right pace, and then high availability. High availability is something that's very important. A lot of times, uh, you have your cell phone with you, and for some reason it's lost. Maybe someone stole your phone, or maybe it broke into and shattered into pieces. You go into a store and you pick up a new phone. One or two things happens. You either backed up your data possibly to the cloud, which means all you have to do is just log in and voila, on your new cell phone you have all that information. You have all of your contacts and even the images and pictures that you've taken are all restored into that cell phone. Now, the worst case scenario, you haven't backed it up to the cloud or some external drive, and now you've lost all of your data. Imagine the damage that would happen to you on a personal level. Now multiply that by a million times with a business, because the business has their database. This is all the information about possibly their employees, about their accounts, about their money, about their purchases and sales and expenses. All the information that runs the business is stored in that database in which you are the database administrator. Something happens and they just lost all of it. High availability is basically that process for us as database administrators to safeguard our data from being lost. Not only that, but also making it readily and more easily accessible to the users. So high availability is A, to make sure in case of any failure that that data is available to us. And then B, to make sure that it's easily accessible to us by maybe even having the hardware and the software available in multiple locations, for instance. So there's different high availability solutions that SQL Server gives, such as failover clustering, database mirroring, replication, always on failure cluster instances, and always on availability groups. Each one of those choices the company would choose based on a number of reasons. Some of it are financial restrictions and the budget that we're working with, because some of that software is more expensive and some is cheaper than others. The other thing is the technical requirements and scope of work. A smaller business that has nightly backups does not need that, or does not necessarily need the amount of replication and availability and so on that a larger business definitely does need to support their business. Next is the SQL Server version. If you have a SQL Server Express or Standard versus Enterprise, there's certain features that might be available or might not be available. So the version that we have also kind of restricts that a little bit. And then the level of automation that we like, because some stuff could be, we could write code for certain things and automate it or run it, and versus other things where we need that very quick high availability, and we definitely need to have that resource or software available to us. And of course, the team that is supporting it, the administrative team that is supporting all of those interactions. Now, the least and the most important form of ensuring not losing our data is making sure that we back up our database. There are different kind of backups. They're all very easy to configure, as we're going to look at right now how to configure them. But we want to make sure that we know the differences between them, and especially the first one, which is the full backup of our databases. We want to make sure that we have a full backup, because without it, transactional logs or differential database backups are pretty much useless. You have to have a full database backup and then build on that on the other features as well. So that's what we want to look at, is how do we have our full backups, and a couple of ideas on how to make sure that we have the right way of doing it. One thing that's very convenient with a GUI interface such as SQL Server, SSMS, SQL Server Management Studio, is there's different ways of doing the same thing. So I could have a shortcut of basically just doing a right click and looking at the different tasks, and sure enough, one of those tasks that I have is the option to back up my database. The right way of doing it, however, or the ideal way of doing it, is to go through my management, expand it, and create a maintenance plan, which ensures that it's a regularly ran job. And I can do a right click on my maintenance plan and choose a new maintenance plan and give it a name. In this case, I'd like to create a backup for the coolest bank database, full backup, click OK. Now that I'm in my maintenance plan, I want to use my toolbox, so I'm going to expand that. I'm going to pin it so it doesn't disappear on me again. And I'm going to go up to Backup Tasks, drag and drop it. There's a couple of very important steps. The first one is to identify what I'm backing up, which database or databases, and then the second step is to schedule it. So the first step is here, configure. The second one is here to schedule it. So let's go ahead and double click. Choose the database that we would like to work with. So which database? It could be all databases, but in this case we specifically said the Coolest Bank database. Click OK. What kind of backup? We said the most important one is the full backup, so we're going to click on full backup. And then I can identify where I'd like my backup to go. Disk, tape, URL. In this case, I want it straight to disk. The destination. Again, SQL Server will save that destination in its memory, but it's usually a better standard to just kind of have a quick, easier path, like a root path. So right under my C drive, I have a folder called Backups. That's where I want my backup to go. The extension is .back. Everything looks good. We're going to click OK. And now I've created my backup job. The next thing is to schedule it. Depending on how long the backup takes and how large the database is, you can have it as daily or weekly or depending on, again, the requirements that you have. In my case, I would like my full backup to be weekly, to run at 12 a.m. on Sundays because that's the least amount of action that we have and transactions that we have in our database. We're going to click OK. Now, one thing that's important is that suppose my database is 100 gigs. Every time I spool out a backup, I have 100 gigs and then another 100 gigs and then another 100 gigs. And in a few weeks, I'm going to fill my entire C drive. I'm going to run out of space. So one thing that I always want to make sure I do in the same backup task or a similar task is that I have a cleanup job. A job that goes in and also does a cleanup of files that are older than X amount of weeks. Would I like to keep 1 week or 2 weeks worth of backups? Depending on that, what I will do is pick Maintenance, Cleanup Task. And as soon as my backup is done, I'm going to connect this. And I want to keep, let's say, 2 weeks worth of backups. My folder is in the backup C drive. And this ensures that I only keep 2 weeks worth of backups. So if each is 100 gigs, I'm keeping about 200 gigs. And if I have transactional backups and differentials and so on, I want to make sure that I have enough space to maintain that and not run out of space. And maybe in that case, I might need to go down to 1 week. Or if I need more, that I could go to 3 or 4 weeks. But I want to make sure that all of my backups combined would still leave me enough sufficient space. So whenever we create our backups, whether on the same job or a different job, make sure that you accommodate for that feature as well. Now we can close it and it should create a job for us. So now if I go to SQL Server Agent, and it has to be on, green, running, look at my jobs, I should have a full backup job, the Coolest Bank. And in here, one thing we could do is look at the properties. One thing that we also want to make sure as database administrators is we cannot afford to schedule a backup job and expect that it's running and then it starts failing and we don't know that it's failing, because running the backup is not the issue, but when the database crashes and I need to restore it, or we lose some data and we need to restore it, that's where it becomes very critical. So we also want to make sure that we look at our alerts and our notifications in case the job fails, that I send out an email, for instance. So those are the kind of things that are very important that we do not want to leave out. When you create a database job, always make sure that you have some kind of notification in case it fails. So if I set up my operators, I can come in and yes, in some cases, if it succeeds, I might want to send an email, but definitely when it fails, I want to be notified immediately. Okay. And with that, we conclude the session on high availability. Thanks for your time, and we look forward to seeing you in future sessions with Learn IT Courses Online. Best of luck in your journey to the introduction to database administration. Thank you.